The world is a complex and turbulent place, where nations across continents face mounting challenges that threaten to bring them to the brink. From political upheavals in Africa to economic instability in Europe, the collapse of countries is not just a fictional concept. It's a stark reality. Picture this: governments struggling to maintain order, economies teetering on the edge, and populations enduring day-to-day uncertainties. It's as if the fate of entire nations is being played out in a high-stakes game where every move could spell disaster. Let's start with Venezuela. Today, we'll explore our list of 10 countries that are at risk of collapsing in 2025. These nations are standing on the edge, caught in a whirlwind of political struggles, economic turmoil, and societal pressures. From armed conflicts to fragile governments, each country on this list faces unique challenges threatening its stability. We'll break down the reasons they made it here and the factors that could lead to their downfall. Buckle up as we uncover the stories behind these nations and why their future hangs by a thread. Number 10, Venezuela. Once a symbol of prosperity in Latin America, thanks to its abundant oil reserves, Venezuela now finds itself trapped in a relentless cycle of economic and political chaos. Over the last decade, the nation has been mired in crisis, with hyperinflation skyrocketing since 2016, reaching an average of 200% by 2024. The government's over-reliance on printing money to cover expenses has only deepened the crisis, devaluing its currency, inflating prices, and eroding the purchasing power of its citizens. Adding to the turmoil, international sanctions, particularly from the United States, have strangled Venezuela's oil exports and cut its access to global markets, further crippling its economy. Public outrage has been evident in widespread protests, notably in 2014 and 2017, which were met with harsh crackdowns by Nicolas Maduro's regime. Maduro continues to hold on to power through the suppression of dissent, imprisonment, and exile of opposition leaders. At the core of Venezuela's collapse lies decades of mismanagement, systemic corruption, and an overdependence on oil exports. These issues have plunged millions into a humanitarian crisis, where even basic necessities like food and medicine are scarce. Between 2012 and 2022, inflation rates exploded by over 9,000%, a stark contrast to the regional average of 88.4%. Looking ahead, economic projections for 2024 suggest a contraction of 35%, worsened by a workforce shrinking due to the displacement of 7 million refugees. With poverty levels expected to engulf 60% of the population and labor shortages disrupting recovery efforts, Venezuela's future remains grim. For its citizens, the effects of years of economic mismanagement have turned daily life into a relentless struggle for survival. Number 9, Lebanon. Lebanon, a country celebrated for its rich history and cultural diversity, with Beirut at its heart, now faces an existential crisis. Since 2019, its economy has been in free fall. The Lebanese pound has lost more than 98% of its value against the US dollar, plunging the country into hyperinflation. The cost of living has become unbearable, with prices of basic necessities skyrocketing beyond the reach of most citizens. For a family of 4, the average monthly expenses now exceed $1,000, while wages remain far below this threshold. By 2022, the World Bank estimated food inflation to have exceeded 500%, and the situation continues to worsen, leading to widespread hunger and malnutrition. Meanwhile, Lebanon's banking sector is in complete disarray. Citizens are unable to access their savings, deepening poverty and financial instability. Adding to these woes, the sectarian power-sharing political system fosters dysfunction and corruption, stalling economic recovery and fueling waves of social unrest. Protests demanding better living conditions and government accountability have become a common sight, but the government's failure to respond has only amplified the frustration. Lebanon's healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, with hospitals grappling with severe shortages of supplies and personnel. Many healthcare workers have emigrated, leaving a gaping void in the system. Access to clean water has also deteriorated due to outdated and poorly maintained infrastructure, further compounding daily hardships for citizens. Regionally, Lebanon's geopolitical position complicates its recovery. Hosting the highest per capita number of refugees globally, combined with ongoing regional tensions, has placed immense pressure on its resources and infrastructure, exacerbating both social and economic tensions. Lebanon is now at a pivotal moment. International support and collaboration are essential to help address its systemic corruption and political dysfunction. Investments in infrastructure, social services, and fostering dialogue among political factions could pave the way for a more stable and resilient society. However, without urgent reforms, Lebanon risks spiraling further into chaos. Number 8. Tunisia. Tunisia, known for its stunning landscapes and rich cultural history, is facing an economic crisis of monumental proportions. The nation's budget deficit is edging toward 10%, largely due to an oversized public sector wage bill. The economic aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, have only worsened the situation, pushing Tunisia closer to the brink of financial collapse. With external accounts showing little chance of recovery, the nation's economic outlook remains dire. Economic growth has been sluggish, with GDP increasing at an average of just 1.2% between 2016 and 2021, a pace far too slow to meet the demands of its growing population. Unemployment, particularly among educated youth, is a glaring issue. In 2023, the national unemployment rate stood at 15.11%, while youth unemployment soared past 37%. This persistent lack of opportunities has fueled widespread dissatisfaction, sparking protests and social unrest across the country. To address these financial difficulties, Tunisia has entered talks with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) for a much-needed loan. However, the loan comes with stringent conditions such as wage freezes, subsidy reductions, and privatization of public assets. These measures have met fierce resistance from labor unions and raised concerns about further destabilizing the country. The global impact of the Ukraine war has also inflated the costs of importing essential goods, compounding Tunisia's economic woes. Shortages of commodities like milk, cereals, and red meat, coupled with severe droughts affecting water supply, have made daily life increasingly difficult for citizens. Corruption continues to erode trust in Tunisia's institutions. Ranked 87th out of 180 nations in Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index, the country's lack of accountability deters both foreign and domestic investment. Tunisia's reliance on imports for basic goods further exposes it to global market disruptions. Rising costs of wheat, fuel, and fertilizers, exacerbated by supply chain disruptions, have strained the national budget and put food security at risk. While government subsidies on staples like bread aim to maintain social peace, they have contributed to a ballooning public debt. Combined with economic stagnation, rising unrest, and political instability, Tunisia's future appears uncertain and fraught with challenges. Number 7. Sri Lanka. Famed for its breathtaking landscapes and vibrant cultural heritage, Sri Lanka is now battling an economic crisis that threatens its very foundation. The country is weighed down by an immense debt of $51 billion as of 2024, owed largely to international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, alongside bilateral creditors like China and India. This crushing debt has pushed Sri Lanka's debt-to-GDP ratio beyond 100%, casting serious doubt on its ability to meet its financial obligations. The situation took a dramatic turn in 2022 when the Sri Lankan rupee depreciated sharply against the US dollar, losing nearly 30% of its value. This devaluation triggered soaring inflation and significantly increased the cost of importing essential goods, including food, fuel, and medicine. While inflation showed signs of stabilization in 2023 after peaking at over 70%, the cost of living remains alarmingly high. Political instability adds to the crisis, with economic struggles sparking widespread unrest and political turbulence. Nearly 30% of Sri Lanka's population now lives below the poverty line, with rural communities bearing the brunt of the hardships. The growing gap between the wealthy and the poor continues to fuel social tensions, creating a volatile environment. Basic services, such as healthcare and education, are also collapsing under the strain. Hospitals report severe shortages of medical supplies, while schools struggle with limited resources, further eroding public trust in the government. Sri Lanka's vulnerability to climate change exacerbates its troubles. Rising sea levels and frequent natural disasters threaten agriculture and fisheries, key pillars of the country's economy. The government's poorly executed ban on chemical fertilizers in 2020 and 2021, aimed at promoting organic farming, led to a disastrous drop in agricultural productivity, worsening food shortages and driving up prices. With mounting economic, political, and environmental challenges, Sri Lanka's prospects for recovery remain bleak. The government's failure to effectively address these crises has left the nation grappling with deepening instability and public discontent. Number 6, Pakistan. Pakistan finds itself at a perilous crossroads, with its stability teetering on the edge. The country's economic crisis has reached a critical level, with foreign exchange reserves alarmingly low, barely enough to cover 5 weeks of imports as of September 2023. This precarious situation has driven the Pakistani rupee to historic lows, plunging the economy into further disarray. With debt servicing consuming roughly 40% of government revenue and external debt climbing to $128 billion, Pakistan faces an overwhelming financial burden. Despite securing aid from the International Monetary Fund (IMF), political instability and deep polarization continue to haunt the nation, especially with impending elections on the horizon. The rupee's devaluation has fueled rampant inflation, expected to hit 27% by 2024, crippling purchasing power and driving up the cost of living. This vicious economic cycle has pushed many into poverty, sparking widespread social unrest as the middle and lower classes struggle to make ends meet. Nearly 40% of the population lives below the poverty line, according to the World Bank. Income inequality remains stark, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a privileged elite. Meanwhile, Pakistan's education system is in crisis, with 23 million children out of school. Healthcare services are equally strained, plagued by inadequate infrastructure, a shortage of professionals, and insufficient funding. These challenges have resulted in poor health outcomes and a dismal Human Development Index ranking. Ethnic and sectarian divisions compound the crisis. The ongoing insurgency in Balochistan and sectarian conflicts between Sunni and Shia Muslims underscored deep-seated tensions that threaten national unity. Additionally, Pakistan's reliance on agriculture makes it especially vulnerable to climate change. Frequent floods and droughts have disrupted agricultural productivity, leading to food shortages and further economic instability. Efforts to address these challenges are often stymied by widespread corruption and bureaucratic inefficiencies. These systemic issues make recovery a daunting task, leaving Pakistan's future hanging in the balance. Number 5, Kenya. Kenya is a nation wrestling with persistent political instability, especially during election periods. This turbulence is deeply rooted in corruption, ethnic tensions, and widespread distrust in government institutions. While the 2022 elections appeared relatively peaceful, unresolved issues continue to simmer beneath the surface. With over 40 ethnic groups, political allegiances often align along ethnic lines, creating fertile ground for conflict. The tragic post-election violence of 2007 to 2008, which claimed over 1,100 lives and displaced thousands, remains a stark reminder of these divisions. Corruption is a pervasive issue in Kenya's political system, affecting everything from public services to government contracts. In 2023, Transparency International ranked Kenya 126th out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perceptions Index, underscoring the scale of the problem. Economically, the country faces mounting challenges, including ballooning public debt. By 2022, Kenya's debt-to-GDP ratio had climbed to 73%, with nearly 30% of government revenue consumed by debt repayments. This leaves limited resources for essential development programs. A severe food crisis further exacerbates Kenya's struggles. Drought, inflation, climate disasters, and internal conflict have led to widespread livestock deaths, crop failures, and malnutrition. Despite the government's Vision 2030 development initiative, meaningful improvements in living standards remain elusive. Security issues also plague Kenya, with both internal and external threats undermining stability. The Somalia-based al-Shabaab terrorist group poses a significant threat, with devastating attacks such as the 2013 Westgate Mall siege and the 2015 Garissa University massacre, leaving scars on the nation. These events have caused numerous casualties and instilled fear across the country. Kenya's political landscape is further complicated by the devolution of power to local levels. While this was intended to bring governance closer to the people, it has also decentralized corruption, making it even more entrenched at local levels. Weak oversight and accountability mechanisms have allowed corrupt practices to flourish, eroding public trust in institutions. The judiciary, despite becoming more independent in recent years, still faces threats and intimidation, limiting its ability to hold the government accountable. The combination of these challenges, political instability, economic hardship, security threats, and systemic corruption, creates a volatile environment that could lead to further instability if not addressed urgently and comprehensively. Number 4, Belarus. Belarus is caught in a tangled web of political, economic, and social crises that pose a serious threat to its future. The nation faces severe economic strain due to European Union sanctions, implemented in response to Belarus's support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These sanctions, intended to pressure Belarus into altering its stance, have instead inflicted significant harm. Financial restrictions have severed access to essential foreign capital, effectively isolating Belarus from the global financial system. Exclusion from SWIFT has shattered trade and commerce, while import bans have caused the cost of living to soar. Belarus's involvement in the Ukrainian conflict extends beyond support, as it has hosted critical Russia-Ukraine meetings and allowed Russian military deployments on its territory. Although there are rumors of direct Belarusian military involvement, nothing has been confirmed. The long-term impact of these actions and sanctions remains uncertain, but further entanglement in the conflict could escalate the crisis, pushing Belarus into deeper instability. Domestically, public dissatisfaction is growing due to the government's failure to provide basic services. The nation's infrastructure, including transportation, healthcare, and housing, is deteriorating due to a lack of investment and modernization. This neglect not only stunts economic growth, but also worsens living conditions, fueling unrest. Additionally, the state of poor infrastructure discourages foreign investment, limiting Belarus's economic opportunities. Systemic human rights abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, and censorship, have created a climate of fear and mistrust. The repression of activists and journalists has stifled any possibility of meaningful dialogue or reform, further dividing an already fragmented society. Many citizens are disillusioned and disconnected from politics, adding strain to the nation's social fabric. The political landscape in Belarus remains bleak. The 2020 presidential elections, widely criticized as fraudulent, sparked massive protests that were violently suppressed by the government. This brutal crackdown has created an atmosphere of repression, where dissent is met with severe penalties. International condemnation of these actions has been widespread, but the Belarusian leadership remains unyielding. Adding to the nation's struggles, a growing brain drain has emerged as young and educated Belarusians leave the country in search of better opportunities abroad. This exodus further weakens Belarus's potential for economic recovery and long-term development, leaving its future increasingly uncertain. Number 3, Ghana. Ghana is grappling with a severe economic crisis, driven by a sharp decline in its currency and a reliance on external borrowing. Between January and October 2022, the Ghanaian cedi lost over 55% of its value against the US dollar, with further depreciation of 10% reported in early 2024. This devaluation has fueled rampant inflation, with interest rates peaking at 30% in 2022 and remaining high at 23.5% in 2024. The resulting financial instability has left Ghana in a precarious economic position. The nation's debt levels paint a grim picture. Despite its inclusion in the Highly Indebted Poor Countries (HIPC) initiative, Ghana's debt has ballooned by 7,000% since 2000, now totaling $54 billion, equivalent to 78% of its GDP. Projections indicate that public debt will surpass 80% of GDP by 2023, significantly limiting government spending on critical infrastructure and services while stalling economic growth. Political instability is adding to the challenges, with growing tensions between the ruling party and the opposition as the 2024 elections approach. The specter of conflict and instability looms large, threatening Ghana's already fragile stability. Corruption further exacerbates the crisis, as evidenced by Ghana's 72nd position on Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index. Public discontent has manifested in widespread protests, with reliance on foreign financing leaving the country vulnerable to external shocks. Environmental degradation adds another layer of difficulty. Issues like deforestation and land degradation disproportionately affect rural communities, where agriculture is a primary source of livelihood. This environmental strain compounds economic instability in regions heavily reliant on farming. Ghana's economic structure also poses challenges. The country's reliance on cocoa and gold exports makes it highly susceptible to fluctuations in global commodity prices. Efforts to diversify the economy have been slow, with the manufacturing sector remaining underdeveloped, limiting job creation and economic resilience. Additionally, while Ghana's education system has seen some progress, it continues to face significant challenges in providing quality services. This lack of investment in human capital undermines the country's long-term development prospects, leaving Ghana at a critical juncture with its future hanging in the balance. Number 2, Nigeria. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, faces a slew of interconnected crises, with frequent power outages symbolizing the depth of its challenges. In 2024, 6 major grid failures plunged millions into darkness, highlighting the inadequacies of Nigeria's electricity infrastructure. This unreliable energy system hampers economic growth and daily life, creating an additional burden on a nation already grappling with severe financial constraints. Nearly 30% of government revenue is allocated to debt repayments, leaving little room for investments in critical infrastructure or social programs. Despite being rich in oil resources, widespread inequality means the benefits of this wealth remain concentrated in the hands of a few. Recent policy shifts, such as the removal of fuel subsidies and a pivot toward cleaner energy, have exacerbated the struggles of vulnerable populations. Economic mismanagement, rampant oil theft, and disruptions in refinery operations further bleed national revenue, leaving Nigeria's economy in disarray. These conditions have also driven a brain drain as skilled professionals seek opportunities abroad, depleting the country's talent pool. Experts predict Nigeria's debt-to-GDP ratio will rise to 46.6% in 2024 and 46.8% in 2025, indicating that nearly half of the country's economic output will be consumed by debt. Politically, instability remains a pressing concern. Nigeria's history of military coups, corruption, and electoral violence continues to erode public trust. Ranked 154th out of 180 countries on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index in 2023, the government's inefficiency and lack of accountability remain significant obstacles to progress. Ethnic and religious divides further complicate the country's fragile unity. With over 250 ethnic groups, tensions frequently flare between the predominantly Muslim North and Christian South. Political and economic power disparities exacerbate these divisions, often leading to localized conflicts. Additionally, security concerns persist. Insurgent groups such as Boko Haram and other militant factions continue to destabilize northern regions, undermining national cohesion and development efforts. For Nigeria, addressing these deep-seated issues is imperative to securing its future stability. Number 1. Ethiopia. Ethiopia remains mired in the devastating aftermath of a prolonged civil war that has left deep scars on the nation's economy and society. The conflict has wrought widespread destruction, claiming countless lives and displacing millions. These events have exacerbated a humanitarian crisis, pushing the country into famine and severe food insecurity. Essential infrastructure lies in ruins, further compounding the challenges facing one of Africa's most populous nations. As of late September, Ethiopia's external public debt stood at a staggering $18 billion, roughly $570 per capita. This financial burden has left the government scrambling for solutions, seeking debt relief and budget aid to manage the strain. Yet, the Ministry of Finance has provided little transparency on its plans for debt restructuring. The conflict's toll on human lives, displacement, and food shortages continues to hinder Ethiopia's recovery, leaving its economy deeply strained and unable to address pressing socioeconomic issues. To ease its debt burden, Ethiopia has turned to the Group of 20's Common Framework, a platform for debt restructuring aimed at supporting economic recovery. However, the country's vulnerability to climate change compounds its challenges. Agriculture, the backbone of Ethiopia's economy, suffers greatly from erratic rainfall, rising temperatures, and frequent droughts and floods. These disruptions have crippled food production, intensifying rural poverty, and deepening the nation's woes. Water shortages present yet another critical issue, with the management of the Nile River posing significant diplomatic challenges. The construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, seen as a game-changer for Ethiopia's energy needs, has become a source of tension with neighboring Egypt and Sudan. These disputes over shared water resources threaten regional stability, underscoring the delicate balance required to manage political and environmental challenges. And there you have it, our deep dive into the 10 countries most at risk of collapse in 2025. Each nation faces its own complex web of crises, from political unrest to economic instability and environmental threats. While these predictions are informed by current trends, the resilience and determination of people within these countries could still shape a different future. Let's hold on to hope and closely watch how these stories evolve in the coming months.